What if I told you that the greatest artwork ever displayed in a prestigious museum wasn't created by a famous artist, but by a man whose job was to mop the floors after everyone went home? That the hands that scrubbed toilets could also create beauty so profound it would make critics weep and change the course of an entire institution? This is the story of James Walker, a 61-year-old night janitor who picked up a paintbrush in a moment of mockery and created something so powerful it forced an entire city to confront its assumptions about art, talent, and the invisible people we've trained ourselves not to see. The Brookfield Contemporary Art Museum was dying a slow, painful death. Attendance had dropped 40% over 3 years. Critics called the exhibits derivative and soulless. The board of directors was quietly discussing closure. Director Victoria Hammond, a 48-year-old art world veteran who'd taken the job 2 years earlier to resurrect the museum's reputation, was drowning in desperation. She'd tried everything: trendy installations, celebrity artist partnerships, social media campaigns. Nothing worked. The museum felt lifeless, a mausoleum for art that no one cared about anymore. The truth Victoria wouldn't admit even to herself was that she'd stopped believing in the institution she was supposed to save. James Walker had worked at Brookfield for 18 years, longer than any curator, longer than most of the art that passed through those galleries. He arrived at 10 p.m. 6 nights a week, when the last visitors had shuffled out and the staff had gone home to their lives. His domain was the after-hours silence, the echo of his footsteps on marble floors, the hum of his floor buffer, the smell of cleaning solution mixing with the faint scent of oil paint and varnish. He knew every corner of that building, every gallery, every storage room filled with art deemed not quite good enough for display. The museum was his in the quiet hours, even if nobody acknowledged that he belonged there. But James had a secret that lived in his tiny apartment across town. Every wall was covered in paintings, landscapes that seemed to breathe, portraits with eyes that followed you, abstract pieces that somehow captured emotions you didn't have words for. James had been painting since he was 7 years old, growing up in rural Alabama where his grandmother had given him a set of watercolors and told him that God gave everyone a gift, and his was to see beauty others missed. He'd painted through poverty, through his mother's death, through the decades of work that exhausted his body, but never quite touched the part of him that needed to create. He painted in the hours between shifts, in the stolen moments before sleep, because not painting felt like not breathing. James had never shown his work to anyone. Who would care what a janitor painted? He had no formal training, no art school degree, no connections in a world that seemed to value pedigree over passion. So he painted for himself, and he worked his shifts, and he existed in two separate worlds that never touched. At the museum, he was invisible. At home, alone with his canvases, he was fully alive. The divide between these worlds felt unbridgeable, carved in stone by all the messages society had sent him about his place and his worth. Everything changed on a Thursday night in October. James was cleaning the main gallery after a particularly brutal donor event. He could still smell the champagne and catered food, could imagine the wealthy patrons in their elegant clothes pretending to understand the mediocre abstract piece that dominated the space. A canvas of angry red slashes that the museum had paid $200,000 for, and that visitors routinely called a mess my kid could make. Victoria Hammond was still there, sitting alone on a bench, staring at the painting with an expression of utter defeat. She didn't notice James enter with his cleaning cart. He heard her talking to herself, or maybe to the empty room. This is what we've become. Expensive garbage that means nothing to anyone. We've forgotten what art is supposed to do. James, normally so careful to stay unnoticed, found himself speaking before he could stop himself. It's supposed to make you feel something true. Victoria's head snapped around, startled to discover she wasn't alone. For a moment, they just looked at each other, the museum director in her designer suit and the janitor in his maintenance uniform, separated by everything except their shared disappointment in what this place had become. Victoria's eyes narrowed, not cruelly, but with exhausted sarcasm born from months of failure. You think you could do better? You, who cleans up after our exhibitions. The words should have been dismissive, but something in her tone suggested she was asking a real question, desperate enough to hear any answer. James met her gaze steadily. Yes, ma'am. I believe I could. The honesty in his voice made Victoria sit up straighter. She laughed, but it was the laughter of someone who'd stopped caring about decorum. "Paint this then," she said, gesturing at the massive empty wall in Gallery 3, a space they'd been unable to fill for months. "Paint something that makes me believe in this museum again. If you can do that, I'll give you a solo exhibition. Paint this, and I'll believe in you." She expected nothing. It was the kind of careless challenge you throw out when you've lost hope. But James took it seriously in a way that should have warned her. "I'll need supplies," he said quietly. "Canvas, oils, time." Victoria, perhaps curious to see how far this strange moment would go, gave him her credit card and access to the museum's art supply budget. "You have 3 weeks. The gallery needs to be ready for our winter season launch. Surprise me, or don't. At this point, I'm not sure it matters anymore." She walked away, already half forgetting the encounter, another desperate attempt that would probably lead nowhere. James spent the next 3 weeks living between two worlds more intensely than ever before. He worked his regular shifts, but he also spent hours in Gallery 3 with that massive blank wall staring at him like a challenge or a promise. He thought about his grandmother, about the gift she'd seen in him. He thought about all the years of painting in secret, all the beauty he'd captured that no one but him had ever witnessed. And he thought about what Victoria had said, that art was supposed to make you feel something true. What truth could he offer that this museum, with all its expensive acquisitions, had lost? He began to paint at 2 a.m. when his cleaning duties were finished, working until dawn touched the windows. The piece that emerged wasn't abstract or conceptual or designed to impress critics. It was a massive, breathtakingly realistic mural of everyday people, the kinds of people who never appeared in museum galleries. A young mother holding her child, her face exhausted but illuminated with fierce love. An elderly man feeding pigeons, his weathered hands gentle and patient. A teenage girl reading a book on a subway, lost in worlds beyond her circumstances. Factory workers, grocery clerks, bus drivers. Ordinary people painted with such care, such profound attention, that their humanity became impossible to ignore. The technical skill was extraordinary. James had taught himself classical techniques through library books and careful observation of the masters whose works he'd cleaned around for years. But the skill alone wasn't what made the piece devastating. It was the empathy, the dignity, the way James had painted these invisible people as if they were saints in a Renaissance altarpiece. He'd titled it simply, "Unseen," because that's what these people were, the background characters in everyone else's story, the ones society had trained us to look past. And James, who'd spent decades being unseen himself, had made them impossible not to see. Victoria came to check on the progress after 2 weeks and stopped dead in her tracks. The mural was only half finished, but already it radiated a power that made her chest tighten. She stood there for 20 minutes, just looking, feeling something she hadn't felt in years, the reason she'd gotten into this field in the first place. Art that didn't need an explanation or a catalog essay. Art that just reached into you and grabbed hold of something essential. When she finally spoke, her voice was shaking. "James, where did you learn to paint like this?" James didn't turn from the wall, his brush moving with absolute certainty across the canvas. "I didn't learn, ma'am. I've just been doing it my whole life. Nobody ever asked to see it before." The simplicity of that statement, the decades of talent exercised in solitude, hit Victoria like a physical blow. She thought about all the mediocre art she'd championed because it came with the right credentials, the right gallery representation, the right critical pedigree. And here was genius, cleaning her floors for minimum wage, because she'd never thought to look beyond his uniform. The night James finished the mural, he called Victoria at home. She arrived at 3 a.m. to find him standing in front of the completed work, paint-stained and exhausted. The piece was transcendent. Gallery 3 had been transformed into a space of profound emotional resonance. Every figure in the mural seemed alive, caught in moments of quiet beauty that elevated the ordinary into the sacred. Victoria stood beside James in silence for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "This is the most important work we've ever displayed. You understand that, right? This changes everything." Victoria kept her promise, but she went far beyond a simple exhibition. She canceled the winter season's planned shows and built the entire program around James's work. She brought in journalists, critics, art collectors, everyone who'd written off Brookfield as irrelevant. The opening night arrived with a twist. Victoria insisted James's story be told truthfully. No sanitizing, no rebranding him as a self-taught artist to make it more palatable. The labels read, James Walker, Brookfield Museum Janitor. She wanted people to confront their assumptions directly. The opening was electric. Critics who'd arrived skeptical left shaken. The New York Times called it the most important American artwork of the decade, a mirror held up to our collective blindness. Social media exploded. People who'd never set foot in an art museum came in droves to see the janitor's masterpiece. But the most powerful moments happened quietly, when working-class people, service workers, the invisible masses that James had painted, came and saw themselves reflected with dignity for perhaps the first time in their lives. A custodian from a nearby hospital stood weeping in front of the painting. "That's me," she said to her daughter. "He saw us. Someone finally saw us." The museum's attendance tripled within 2 months. James Walker became internationally known, with galleries from New York to London offering exhibitions. But he negotiated something remarkable. He'd only show his work if the host institution agreed to hire and properly compensate their maintenance staff, and to create programs showcasing art from working-class communities. He used his sudden platform not to escape his background, but to illuminate it, to force the art world to confront its elitism and its waste of human potential. Victoria Hammond transformed too. She launched a program called Unseen Talent that actively recruited artists from non-traditional backgrounds, formerly incarcerated people, the homeless, service workers, anyone whose circumstances had kept them from the art world's gates. The program became a model copied by museums worldwide. Within 2 years, Brookfield went from nearly closing to being considered one of the most vital cultural institutions in the country. And Victoria credits it all to the night she was desperate enough to actually listen to her janitor. Research shows that 80% of artistic talent is never developed or recognized, primarily because of barriers related to class, education access, and social networks. Think about that staggering waste. 8 out of 10 people with genuine creative gifts never get the chance to develop them, never get seen, never get to contribute what they could offer the world. James Walker was lucky only in that someone finally noticed. How many others are out there right now, creating beauty in secret, waiting for someone to ask, to look, to care? James still works at Brookfield, though his title is now artist in residence. He maintains a studio in the museum and teaches painting classes to service workers every Saturday. He sold paintings for hundreds of thousands of dollars, but he lives modestly and donates most of the money to arts education programs in underserved communities. "I don't need much," he says. "I just needed to be seen. That's all any of us really need. To have someone look at us and recognize that we're more than the job we do to survive." The mural Unseen still hangs in Gallery 3. It's become something of a pilgrimage site, a place where people go to feel connected to something larger than themselves. Visitors leave notes. "Thank you for seeing us. This made me cry. I showed my daughter so she'd know that everyone matters." The museum keeps these notes in an archive that's grown to thousands of entries. They're a testament to what happens when art stops being about impressing critics and starts being about connecting humans to their shared dignity. Victoria keeps a photo on her desk. James on opening night, standing in front of his masterpiece, surrounded by people who'd previously been invisible to the art world. She looks at it whenever she's about to make a decision about programming or hiring. It reminds her that the most important question isn't, "Where did you study?" or "Who represents you?" The most important question is, "What can you create? And have we given you the chance to show us?" That shift in questioning has made all the difference. So here's what I want you to take away from this story. Look around your life, your workplace, your community. Who are you not seeing? What brilliance is hidden behind uniforms, job titles, and assumptions? The person serving your coffee might be a novelist. The security guard might be a photographer. The janitor might be the most talented artist you'll ever encounter. But you'll never know unless you're willing to look past the surface, to ask the questions that society has trained you not to ask, to believe that talent and worth aren't distributed according to job descriptions or paychecks. James Walker didn't change in the 3 weeks he spent painting that mural. He'd always been exactly that talented, exactly that capable of creating profound beauty. What changed was that someone finally gave him a wall to paint on and permission to be seen. The tragedy isn't that James spent 18 years cleaning floors. The tragedy is that he could have been sharing his gift with the world for 18 years, but nobody bothered to find out what else lived in him beyond his job title. How many other James Walkers are out there right now, their talents locked away, waiting for someone to finally ask, what would you create if someone believed in you? If this story moved you, hit that like button and tell me in the comments about a time you discovered unexpected talent in someone you'd overlooked. Subscribe to stay connected to stories that challenge us to see each other more clearly, more fully, more honestly. Because the next time you walk past a janitor, a cashier, a delivery person without really seeing them, remember James Walker. Remember that genius doesn't announce itself with credentials. Sometimes it just waits quietly, hoping someone will finally be curious enough to ask, what else can you do? And when you ask that question, when you really mean it, when you're actually ready to see the answer, you might discover that the person who can change everything, who can create something beautiful that matters, was right there all along. They were just waiting for someone to hand them a paintbrush and say, show me what you can do.